Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast. A very exciting guest and someone I've been looking forward to speaking to all week who will be joining us today. We're joined by Diana Cruz Solash, who's Vice President and Global Head of Inclusion, Talent and Community at Infor. Diana, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am well. Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be on and hope you're keeping well as well.
Thank you very much. Well, we've got a lot to jump into and talk about today. Really excited about it. But before we do that, tell everyone a bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
Sure. So I'm coming to you from New York City. I live in downtown Manhattan. If I'm lean over a little bit this way, I can see the Statue of Liberty and the Freedom Tower is out my other window. So very much in the heart of the city. I've got two kids. I'm a single mom. I've got two kids. My son is 16 and my daughter is 13, and we're all, I think now 7 weeks in
Has it been that long?
yeah, I think so.
Wow, time's flying.
Since mid-March, yeah, we've I think adjusted to being home together pretty much 24/7 and not irritating each other all the time.
That's an achievement as well. Really? You've not you must have irritated each other a little bit, surely.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, yes, that's true. If they were to give me honest feedback and an honest appraisal, I'm sure they would say, yeah,
My
absolutely.
wife wouldn't agree with me being not annoying her, I think.
Yeah, I think I was nagging my daughter about the dishes this morning, which it was her turn to do the dishes. Gosh, I've been at Infor for almost 2 years. It was July of 2018 that I joined, and I think we'll get into that a little bit later. But prior to that, I spent over 20 years at Ernst & Young, terrific, phenomenal organization. Worked in a number of different human resources capacities, started out in campus recruiting fresh graduates out of university into our tax practice, and then moved into a learning and development role, into organizational development, communications, corporate social responsibility, inclusion and diversity, did some HR generalist work. And then about 9 years ago, I found my passion, which really has been inclusion and diversity, and had the opportunity to specialize in that for the last, gosh, yeah, 9 years, doing that at both a global level, and then I had some US specific responsibilities. And I was an economics and psychology major. So I think it's both the data and the human behavior combined that draws me to inclusion and diversity.
Yeah, what a journey! And you're one of the only D&I leaders I've spoken to. Just came to my head that the data part is something that you love. And
I love data. I
yeah,
really do. I
yeah,
actually really like it.
like the opposite on that side. My co-founder's the data guy. I'm like the more creative person. But where did the passion for inclusion and diversity stem from? You know, where for in your career, but personally, what is it that drives you and makes you so passionate about this topic?
Yeah, sure. We always joke around in inclusion and diversity, practitioners, that there's a little bit of me search in addition to the research. And so for me, my background is that my parents immigrated to the United States from the Philippines, I guess 3 months before I was born. My mom had worked on an Indian reservation in North Dakota to get her green card. She was a nurse, and she earned her green card, and that allowed my dad, my sister, who was, I guess, 12 months, a year at the time, and my mom to move to Washington State in the US. And they came because they were hoping for a better life. And so they came with 3 suitcases, stayed with some friends, and then made
Wow.
their way to the East Coast of the US. And yeah, I'm really thankful to them for that. But one of the things that I noticed growing up is that, we were certainly a traditional Filipino household. Respect authority. If you're asked to do something by your parents, the answer is yes. Don't ask why. Very traditional, which was very different from being educated in the
Mhm.
American schooling system, where you're rewarded for being outspoken, for raising your hand. Interrupting is a national sport in the US. So it was a little bit of a different.
That's way of putting it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I realized that I wasn't quite navigating the norms of my house, and then of in my house I was too American. In school I was probably too quiet, and too, not the norm. And so for me, that really sparked this interest of how do you create a sense of belonging and create a sense of, I can achieve and be seen and be heard, whatever my background is.
Yeah. How did that translate into your role? Because obviously the first few roles you had weren't specifically focused on this. When did the first opportunity come for you to step into a role in inclusion and diversity? What did that look like? How did that come about?
Yeah, that came about in 2000. I had switched from a corporate-wide role in learning and development into a regional role. I was now working in a business unit. My boss at the time, she's a huge sponsor of mine, a woman named Karen Twarnite, who is the chief diversity officer at Ernst& Young, said to me, "Why don't you take on this program called Inroads?" Inroads is a pipeline building program for college students, bringing in underrepresented minorities and providing internships with companies across the U.S. And she said, "Why don't you look after that program? We need somebody to take a look after that." And that was really my first foray in diversity and inclusion, and not surprisingly, from a recruiting angle. Most companies, their first thing is to say, what are the levers we can pull to create a more diverse and inclusive workforce and workplace, and recruiting is certainly an important one. So that
Mhm.
was really my first foray. And then from there, it was, when people come in, how are we making sure the environment is inclusive so people want to stay?
Yeah, yeah. And that was it. You're hooked from then.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, for me, I love when leaders or people come to me and they say, "Hey, tell me more about this inclusion and diversity thing." And we talk about inclusion is casting a wide net, and seeing potential where perhaps you hadn't seen it before, because maybe you have some set notions of what talent and potential looks like. So I love when leaders say, "Oh, wow, I hadn't considered that this piece of criteria that I had from, hiring 10 years ago, like they must have gone to this school or they must have taken these courses. Maybe that's not a requirement anymore."
Yeah.
So I love when those moments happen.
Tell everyone a bit more about the new role. Why did you take on this new role in Infor and kind of just start. Actually, let's just start there.
Sure. Yeah. So I think I said earlier that I joined Infor almost 2 years ago, and I of course I love EY. I still say that in the present because I have many friends and colleagues there. But honestly, I was really itching to go somewhere else because I found the passion within the talent and HR field, and that's inclusion and diversity. And I really wanted to go build something on my own from fresh, learning what I've learned at EY and from my colleagues at other big companies. And I was really, really picky about what the fact pattern needed to be. So I knew it would have to be a new role where they never had
So newly
somebody in the role
created
before,
role.
where I
Mhm.
could create it. Two, I ideally wanted to work in tech, because tech, for better or for worse, moves fast.
Mhm.
You have to be agile. They like experimenting, trying new things, getting feedback and then moving, and adjusting on the fly, which I thought would be tremendous. And EY, was an organization of 250,000 people, at the core, monitors risk. So just a very different environment, an environment I loved, but I was looking for something a little bit faster. And then I needed to know that I had C-suite support. So I was really pleased when I interviewed that I didn't have to ask, but I was told, "You're going to interview with the entire C-suite. Our CEO, our CFO, our chief technology officer, our chief operating officer, our CHRO, our chief ethics and compliance officer." And I said, "Oh, they're serious. They're
That
really
alone,
serious
as I
about
say,
that."
that alone shows the commitment. Just that alone, because that's normally not the case from what I've heard.
Exactly, and I've taken a
Yeah.
number of calls. I had taken a number of calls over the years previously, and it was sort of like, you'll meet with the head of recruiting, and you'll meet with the head of HR, and then,
That's it.
one person over here. And I just thought, well, why would I leave such a great place like EY if the circumstances weren't absolutely optimal? And
Mhm.
I found that with Infor. And so it's been everything that I thought I would love about it, I love. Everything that I thought could be, challenging is challenging,
Mhm.
which is to say that my expectations were well set and I'm having a ton of fun.
Well, my question, you kind of answered a little bit. I was gonna say, what drove the decision for them to create this function?
Mm,
Where was that decision? What was the why behind it? Who drove
sure. Sure. So Charles Phillips, who was the CEO at the time, he's now chairman, or has been chairman at Infor. He had done a lot already. So I shouldn't say that there was nothing in place. There were some elements of inclusion and diversity efforts in place at Infor before I joined. Before I joined, there was the Women's Infor Network, the Veterans Infor Network. There were some recruiting elements in place where we were recruiting at HBCUs and HSUs to diversify our incoming talent. But that being said, when I met with Charles, I asked him the very same question. I said, "Why now? Is there
Mm.
some scandal? Is there something?
Yeah.
What's?" I always want to know, and I always
Unfortunately,
want to
that's
be
normally
real.
the reason a lot of times why it does happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, no. He's like, I realized if we really wanted to accelerate this, we have to have some intention and some focus. And we need somebody who does this for a living to help guide us. And I said, okay, tell me more about. I always worry too that when somebody's hired, it's going to be, okay, Diana's got this covered, the head of diversity's got this covered, everybody can sort of pull back. So I just made sure that that was not going to be the case and that I would still have involvement and support.
I love it. Love it. So what did your first sort of 30, don't say 60, 90 days look like? How did you focus on both getting quick wins, but also sort of developing an understanding of the landscape and sort of start to piece together your strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely the first step was a current state assessment. I'm sure
Yeah.
that's not shocking to anybody who's listening in or to you. But it was both on the data side as well as on the qualitative side. So I did a thorough scan of all the data that we had available at the time. So, all the sort of usual diversity and representation metrics. So, hiring, headcount at different levels. So it's not just, aggregated um, as one number, but,
Hmm.
executive level, managerial level, individual contributor, promotions, executive, you name it. And then looking at our inclusion data, which was primarily our engagement survey, not just on the inclusion questions, but differences across groups
Okay.
in percent favorable to certain questions. And then the anecdotal, I set up listening sessions. So Infor is 17, for those of you who are listening who may not know Infor quite so well, it's 17,000 employees across nearly 50 countries. So a very global footprint, which is another reason I joined. So I set up listening sessions because I didn't want to just be informed by the numbers. I wanted to be informed by experiences. So I was serious when I said my job is to listen to and tell stories.
The numbers
Um,
you can work the numbers to make them look however you want, to reflect whatever you
absolutely,
want. It's important to get both
absolutely,
sides. Yeah.
absolutely. So I did a lot of listening, and really, I asked three questions. One was, what makes you feel included? What can make you feel like an outsider? And if you were me, what are one or two things you would change? So really simple questions, and I love the diversity and how people express themselves on the calls. The EMEA listening sessions, people were debating with me, and I thought it was fantastic. They were like, "Wow, we've never had someone who's
Probably been
willing
asked.
to be challenged and
Yeah.
be debated with." I'm like, "This is terrific." And then in other places, it was more a lot of questions and asking and probing. So, what do you mean by diversity? What do you mean by inclusion? What is this concept? What are you here to do? So
Love
those two things were really the big things, and that was really honestly part of my quick win too, because there hadn't been a lot of visibility to what the current state was, from both a numbers perspective and an experience. So, what does it feel like to work at Infor? So, I was able to take those two things and paint a picture of where we had strengths, where we had opportunities, and what the path forward would be. And to me, it was really important that I didn't just come in and say copy paste from
that. Yeah.
you know, um, off the shelf
Mhm.
diversity 101, but really say, okay, let me listen to my colleagues first and then context the strategy for where this organization and where my colleagues actually are.
Mhm.
So those were really intentionally quick wins.
How did you then go about piecing all of that together into a cohesive story to present back? Because that must have been quite difficult because you're having all these different calls, so much different perspective, insight. How did you then go about piecing that together in a language or or a dashboard of some sense that actually could make sense?
So I had the typical, here are the proof points for why inclusion and diversity matter.
Mhm.
And this is outside, research. We can cite any number of research things. And then I had so here, where are we at Infor? And I basically laid out a slide that was basically those three questions that I mentioned. So what makes you feel included? What can make you feel like an outsider? And where do we think we can improve? And laid that out and said, here's what our colleagues are telling us. And then here are the numbers. So these experiences lead to these numbers.
Great. So yeah, great.
Yeah, and then here's the implication for the strategy, and the
Right, you
strategy that
tied it back into the business objectives, of course.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So then the strategy, we bucketed into very, I like things in threes, so it was, three
I
questions to
noticed.
ask.
Yeah, I noticed it. Yeah.
So the strategy is really focused on workplace and in creating an inclusive workplace where everyone feels safe, trusted, and valued for their unique perspectives, identities, and backgrounds. Then workforce, enriching the diversity of our workforce in line with the marketplace. And then marketplace and leveraging diversity to strengthen our relationships in the community and with our customers. And we intentionally, we had some debate because somebody said, hey, Diana, why aren't you starting off with workforce? Because shouldn't you go workforce, workplace, marketplace, and like small to big? And I said, you could do that, but this is very intentionally workplace first, because if you just
Love that.
hire people to diversify the workplace and the workforce without the inclusive workplace, it's just going to be like a colander where all the
Yeah,
talent is flowing out as fast as you put it in. So that resonated quite well, and
yeah.
it honestly was what my colleagues were telling me we needed to focus on first. So I think that was reflected, and that inclusion comes first. I used to be VP inclusion and diversity, and inclusion is what's in there now. Really means a lot.
What was the initial feedback from people? What were some of the
Hmm.
takeaways that you got from that initial dialogue and those calls?
Yeah, so I think that so you talked it when before the call you were talking about my colleague Anne Benedict, who is our chief human resources officer, and she came into Infor about a year and a half before me, and she really marked the sign that Infor wanted to focus on its culture and its people. So Infor has been built out of acquisition over a number of years and really was focused on product capabilities and then cloud infrastructure. And we're in this phase now. We're not forgetting those two things, but we're in this phase now where we're really focused on our culture and our people. And Anne was really the signal that we're going to take this seriously. So when I joined, one of the things, and I knew this coming in because I had asked, is that we didn't have a lot of talent development programs for our people. So I heard that a lot when I talked to my colleagues that, hey, you know what? Because there was also a lot of misperceptions for what I stood for. So people would say, hey, I believe in diversity, but we need baseline foundational talent development programs for all of our people. We all need to feel invested in. So I heard that very loudly and clearly. And of course, there are certain pockets, depending on what populations we're talking about, where, yeah, we do have to make differential efforts and investments, just like many other companies do. So that's why inclusion comes first and workplace comes first, because I heard loudly and clearly from my colleagues that we need to make a step change in our culture. So we've done a lot of things. We've created a new manager learning program for individuals who are promoted into manager, which we hadn't had before. We have a new global onboarding program. We have continuous performance feedback. These are all things that are new
Mhm.
within the last year and a half.
I don't think most people picture inclusion diversity as a key player in those areas.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good point. I think there's front stage work and there's backstage work. So to me, I think what most people see are, oh, well, Diana's going to come in and she's going to come in and do all these really visible things for women and minorities and
Mhm.
focus on employee resource groups and conferences. which
Yeah.
absolutely we do. We have our women's network, our veterans network, and we just launched Black at Infor, and we're launching out at Infor for our LGBTQIA and ally colleagues. So absolutely, that's absolutely important. I don't want to make it seem like it's not,
Of course.
but that does not necessarily impact the day-to-day experience of our people. It's things like, how does your manager treat you every day? Do you have the learning that you need? Are you getting assigned opportunities that will help you grow and learn? And are those assignments made equitably and fairly? And that's the backstage work that a lot of people don't see, because that's a
Yeah.
lot of the guts of the organization. But that's also why I joined Infor, because I knew we didn't have a lot of that in place, and I wanted to be around the table to build those things in an equitable way.
Hmm. And I think that's really shines through. I said to you before the show, I could see how strong your relationship was with the CHRO and the team there, and that this what you've just said really reflects that as well. Because there are many DNI leaders that I speak to that don't actually they play on that first level that you just discussed, and they don't really work in any of those other projects or strategies or areas you just discussed as well. So it's good. It's great to hear that from you as well. And as you said, most people don't see that work that goes on
Right.
behind that as well. So really important. Can we talk about data a second? Because obviously this is something that you're very passionate about. How are you gathering data and analyzing and communicating data to support your I&D initiatives?
Oh, so this is one of my most fun projects, and I laugh because I guess it seems rather nerdy, but I am a nerd at heart. So so I love it. But I think data is really important. So we have this analytics capability within Infor. It's our own product called Burst. Within Burst, we've built what we're calling our HR executive dashboard. And it's been something that we've worked on for a few months, because you had to get the data from different sources, put it in the
That's
data
the hard
lake,
part.
pull it from the data lake, visualize it, test it, etc. You get it. But now we have it, and our levels. So level one is our CEO, but our top three levels of leadership now have real-time access to all sorts of HR data for their organization at their fingertips. And it's full HR data. It's not just inclusion and diversity, but it's hiring, it's retention, it's recognition, it's who's gotten feedback. There's an inclusion and diversity dashlet within the HR executive dashboard, and people can now just source it for themselves real time. At the same time, you can tell I really love this project,
Yeah,
because
that's why
I,
I
I
asked.
don't know who else gets so excited about this. At the same time, we built a strategy guidebook for our HR business partners to say, okay, this is the first time many of you are able to actually get visibility into this data quickly. So we're going to build a strategy guidebook for you to have conversations with the leaders that you support, and you can ask consulting questions. So if you see this in the data, or look for this in the data,
Mhm.
if you see this, ask this, and then it maps to this resource and program and process.
Oh, great. So you've got
So it's a
you've
nice
tied it all
mapping.
together. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Love it. What are some of the data points that they can see in there?
You can see, I guess, what we call ins. So that's hiring in. You can see outs. So that's attrition. You can
Mhm.
see promotions. You can see mobility. You can see engagement survey data. Some of the things that I like from an inclusion perspective are who's getting feedback and who's getting recognition. So you can actually look at that data by gender and then ethnicity in the US. To say, hey, are people getting feedback? And it's how many people have had a feedback meeting with their manager in the last quarter. And you can see that by different groups and say, are there certain populations, and it could be level, it could be tenure, it could be gender, it could be ethnicity, that are getting more or less feedback?
Yeah.
Yeah, it gives you some visibility other than, because that stuff moves, right? Like the balance sheet of diversity, people always want to know, like, well, how is my head count moving? That doesn't move very fast. But if you can change the things like engagement, feedback, um, and recognition, you're doing the things that will create better experiences that will start to change the other more slow moving
Mhm.
aspects. I hope
And
that makes sense.
No, no, definitely makes sense. And I'm just thinking from a leadership perspective as well. It's so great for them, and it's no longer them coming to you; they have it at their hands, and I
Right.
think that's so important as well. It's no longer a DNI and HR. It's in everyone.
Right.
We're all bought into this, and we all have access to the data, which is incredible. And obviously, you created a great roadmap and sort of guide of how they can get the most out of it, ask the right questions, and
Right.
then of course link that back to programs which have the benefit and add value, of course. So they can,
Right.
as a leader, I can see exactly where it's adding value to the
Yeah, and I
organization.
was concerned, and it's interesting because we have a huge number of our organization are in sales, and they're quite competitive. I've already had a couple of our sales leaders say, "Oh my gosh, I just noticed this in the dashboard. How do I get better at this?" So
Yeah.
they're taking a look at, seeing the numbers and the metrics matter.
Yeah, and that's obviously driving behaviors
Right.
as well, which is what you want. What performance related measures do you have in place? What does success look like for you and the team?
So I think, as I said, there are things that can move faster, and then there are things that move more slowly, and then there are things that are hard to measure. But the things that I think can move faster, so I call them sort of momentum metrics, are things like, what can you do on a day-to-day basis that you can see change in day-to-day? And those things would be like recognition. So we have this program called Raves, where people can recognize each other and send something through our HCM system and say thank you for X, Y, and Z. That can create higher engagement, higher sense of
Yeah.
belonging, higher connectivity. Feedback is another one of those. And again, as I said, in the dashboard, we can see differences in who's getting feedback, and are there areas to watch out for. And then engagement, we do these pulse surveys. We're doing them more regularly now because all of us
Yeah, of
are
course. Yeah.
working remotely and not seeing each other, but we do them once every 4 to 6 weeks. So we're able to see pulse survey questions about how productive are you? How connected do you feel? And those things. So seeing, to me, success would be that we're seeing consistently high levels of satisfaction or high benchmarks on that with no difference among groups, whether that's geographically, level wise, gender, ethnicity, tenure, company of origin, because as I said, we're a company of acquisitions. So consistently high, not significant differentials. And then there are the things that move a little bit more slowly. So like recruiting, that's not a day-to-day thing necessarily. That's more like quarter to quarter. Um, attrition is, to me, that's a look back measure. That's something that is an impact of all those things that I talked about that are
Yeah.
momentum metrics. We want to be able to, as I said, enrich the diversity of our workforce in line with what's in the market. So what is the market? And that doesn't mean just globally. Um, it means in each market, what's the
Mhm.
available talent and how are we doing recruiting to that market of talent? And then down the line, everybody's, interested in what should our end goal be? Should it be 50-50 women? Should it be, X percent Black, Latinx, Asian, etc. Yes, we should eventually be where the market is, but I think, you know, measuring ourselves against that can be frustrating because it takes a while to get there. But if you focus on the momentum metrics, the shorter term metrics,
You'll get there. Yeah.
you'll get there.
Yeah. I think that's probably quite daunting when other companies start these initiatives and they look at those examples and like,
Absolutely.
ah,
And then there's stuff
like,
that you can't measure, right? So
true.
I talk about, well, it doesn't, such an old term, but water cooler talk,
Yeah.
right? So not water cooler talk. Maybe it's what is the level of conversation in meetings? Is everybody speaking up? Are people challenging each other? What does that feel like? And I guess you can sort of see it in engagement metrics.
I'm
But
with you. I get exactly what you're saying.
yeah,
It's hard to measure
yeah,
those things. In terms of like obviously how people are feeling, you can see that reflected in the engagement survey somewhat, but
right,
those things is hard to see. Do people feel like they have space and to talk to make themselves heard during those meetings, stuff like that? That's very hard.
exactly.
Has your role evolved? Because obviously you've got the community element to it now. How has it evolved since you started?
Yeah, so it has evolved. So about 2 months into my tenure at Infor, our chief operating officer said, "Hey, we really need to also formalize our volunteerism and community engagement strategy." why don't you take that on?
Great.
And,
Why not?
leading with a no is not a good answer, especially when you're 2 months in. But personally, I actually already had experience doing that at EY. So, and it's a passion of mine. So I, said
And it
yes.
goes hand in hand with your role in terms of reflecting that both inside and supporting the community outside. So it makes complete
Completely.
sense. Yeah.
Completely. So that changed, and it's a fantastic thing to work on because I have 40 or so community engagement ambassadors from our major locations across the world. It is absolutely one of my favorite calls that I do every 2 months to hear what good we're doing in the community. So it's absolutely fabulous. And then recently, I guess it was right around the time we went into quarantine. I took on the role as the lead HR business partner for our America's general manager. So looking after our America's sales and services organizations. So I never before thought that it would be possible to do an HR business partner role and the role that I came in to do, but I love
Yeah.
it because I can build the stuff and then I can implement it and work with our HR business partners who are terrific and they're wanting to do this work.
Yeah.
I
That's
can,
something you probably may have
yeah,
missed, and is you're building a lot of it, but in terms of the execution and seeing it come
right.
to life, that might be something that I know from speaking to colleagues, and even I've experienced that personally,
Yeah.
where sort of the more senior roles that I've moved into, I haven't perhaps been on the ground level rolling it out, seeing it come,
Hmm.
seeing the impact it has directly firsthand,
You're
which
right.
is something that probably the most fulfilling part of it.
It
Uh,
is. And that's what you can do when you're at a 17,000 person organization versus a 250,000 person organization. And, for understandable reasons.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about I wanna jump into sort of the current events and what's going on right now,
Sure.
because I've had some very interesting conversations with your peers over the past few weeks,
Hmm.
read some research. How are you working with the team, first and foremost, to support your employees during lockdown?
Yeah. So we actually went globally to work from home across all of our offices, regardless of what the situation was on the ground and what government entities were advising in mid March. So
Very
one
early.
that gave a lot of people relief because they wondered, oh, I don't know, I'm not so comfortable. I don't know if I want to be traveling to the office. I don't want to know if I want to get on a plane to go to a customer. And we just made it easy to say, you know what, we're going to do this as an organization. So that was one. Our executive team has been terrific, and have gotten feedback not just from our community engagement ambassadors. I've gotten it from our employee network co-chairs, who we've been doing more regular connect points, as well as we have an engagement committee. And they've all said, hey, these regular communications from our executive team, which come weekly from our CEO, have been really helpful in just sharing how are we doing as a business? What are our priorities? And the priorities have clearly been employee first. So that's been terrific.
What form are
And
they coming? How is that being communicated? Is it a Zoom call where everyone globally is jumping on? What does that look like, that communication?
so it's varied mechanisms. So first, it started out as WebEx. Actually, then it's evolved to email. But then the executive team actually did an Ask Me Anything Zoom call
Mhm.
last week, which was really fun. So they had eight or so of the executives with people just submitting whatever questions they wanted and getting their views. So that was really well received.
Nice.
And then I guess it was probably the week after we all went to work from home that we started a series of virtual teaming circles. And that's something that has been coming out of our inclusion and diversity and talent management functions and hosted and led by our employee networks. So they've been absolutely vital in this process. Our employee networks have operated virtually and remotely since they've existed because we have so many offices, so many people
Exactly.
travel.
Mhm.
A lot of our stuff was done remotely anyway, so that we were able to quickly host effective virtual teaming. We did something for working from home with family,
Know
where we
about that.
had, yeah, and
The
then we're going to
birthday.
be doing a wellness week coming up in a couple of weeks. So it's been really great,
Nice.
and then we have all these resources. So people have said, I feel actually more connected.
Well, do you think that this is also a time where D&I is kind of shining through in that sense? Because it's the importance of those groups before perhaps may not have been appreciated, but are now really highlighted. during these moments?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, I was saying to our employee network leaders, I said, I'm so grateful that we, launched these two additional groups. We have another couple in the works for our Hispanic and Latinx colleagues, as well as for uniquely abled
Mhm.
individuals. So those are coming online too. But I'm really thankful we have them because everybody who leads those networks and is involved has broader networks, and we can get messages out quickly. We can touch base with our membership quickly and just say, we just did a happy hour for one of our women's network chapters on Friday. And it was, we can do those things really fast because we have the mechanisms in place to make them happen.
I've seen also some companies go in the opposite direction, unfortunately, where kind of D&I has kind of fallen to the wayside. It's not important right now. It's not strategic. What would you say to those companies? And these are some large organizations, not going to mention names, but I've had conversations with many of your peers who
Yeah,
are very frustrated right now in the reaction of their organizations.
I'm sure. And, I think where organizations are now is probably a reflection of where they were in their journey to begin with. So, you and I talked about front stage versus backstage.
Hmm.
If really the commitment was to just sort of that front stage stuff of, oh, let's have these networks because they look good and we're going to,
It's like
you
a
know,
PR and PR
yeah,
piece.
PR and that's not the only reason that companies do them, but these folks want to have them, and there's no real tie to we have executive sponsors who sit on our executive team for those networks. If you don't have that level of embeddedness, that's not even a word,
Mhm.
and you don't have the backstage work where you're around the talent management table, it's going to be really easy in crisis mode to say that's not necessary. So that's one that doesn't really help with what would I say to I guess what our CEO Kevin Samuelson always talks about, being focused on our customers, and the first thing he always has said when I've heard him speak is that we need multiple points of view and perspectives around the table, and we
Now
need
more than ever, yeah, you're
and
completely right.
exactly now more than ever. So now more than ever, we've been relying on people all across the world to say, what's the situation on the ground? How are people feeling? How are our customers doing? What do you need? Um, and it's really helped us understand, how do we pivot and
Yeah.
how can we be best responsive and agile?
Well, Diana, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. It's been a real pleasure, and appreciate your advice, your guidance, and telling your story and journey with us. It's been really, really great. And before we wrap up, if there's sort of one parting piece of advice you could give to your peers that are kind of new into their journey, what would that be? Based on your experience, both personally and professionally, and also where's the best place for them to connect with you if they want to reach out, say hello?
Okay, the best place to connect with me, that's an easier question. It's probably LinkedIn, at Diana Cruz Solash, or on Twitter, at Diana Cruz Solash. And then one parting piece of advice. I think many of us know this already, but I'm just going to reiterate this. I think that the inclusion and diversity is a joint effort among everyone in the organization. So wherever you can find allies to the work and partner and get people involved, maybe it doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe it's not the exact academic based on research answer, but I think getting people involved in the execution and moving fast and testing and trying things out will help us accelerate.
Hmm. And build meaningful connections throughout the
Absolutely.
organization as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Diana, for joining us, and I wish you all the best. And hopefully, I get to see you in person on the other side of this when we come visit you guys.
I look
Okay.
forward to it. Thanks, Chris.
All right. See you later.
Bye bye.
Bye.